The sight of my mother-in-law rearranging my kitchen cabinets while my father-in-law commandeered my television remote should have been my breaking point, but it was actually Tuesday morning when I found my sister-in-law doing laundry in my basement that I finally snapped. 3 years of weekend invasions, impromptu family dinners I wasn't invited to plan, and my husband David's constant excuses had pushed me past every limit I thought I had. That morning, staring at Amanda folding her children's clothes in my laundry room, I made a decision that would change everything forever. Looking back now, I realize the warning signs started on our wedding day 3 years ago. While David and I were honeymooning in Cancun, his mother Gloria had used the spare key to completely rearrange our newly furnished apartment. When we returned to find our couch moved, kitchen reorganized, and my personal photographs replaced with family portraits, David just laughed it off as his mother being helpful. That should have been my first clue about what married life would truly become. Every Friday evening at exactly 5:30 like clockwork, the invasion would begin. David's entire extended family would descend upon our modest 3-bedroom ranch house in suburban Ohio without so much as a courtesy phone call. Gloria and Frank, his parents, would arrive first in their oversized SUV, followed closely by his sister Amanda, with her husband Tyler and their twin boys Mason and Luke, who were 7 years old and treated our home like their personal playground. Derek, David's younger brother, would show up with his girlfriend Sophia, often carrying overnight bags as if our guest bedroom belonged to them. The routine never varied, and it never stopped escalating. Gloria would immediately head to my kitchen, opening cabinets and refrigerators as if conducting an inspection. She would cook elaborate meals using my groceries, spices, and cookware, never asking permission or offering to contribute financially. My carefully planned weekly meal prep would disappear within hours, consumed by a family that never invited me to participate in the menu decisions. Frank would settle into my living room recliner, immediately commandeering the television remote and switching from my preferred evening news to whatever sports game caught his attention. He would adjust the thermostat without asking, often cranking the heat up to 82 degrees during summer months, sending our utility bills skyrocketing. When I mentioned this to David, he would just shrug and say his father had circulation problems. Amanda treated my laundry room like her personal dry cleaning service. She would arrive with multiple loads of clothing for her entire family, including Tyler's work uniforms and the boys' grass-stained baseball jerseys. She used my expensive Detergent Pods fabric softener and even my delicate cycle settings for her own clothes, while relegating my belongings to wait until she finished. The worst part was discovering she had been washing cloth diapers from her neighbor's baby, claiming she was helping a friend but using my utilities and supplies. The guest bedroom became Derek and Sophia's permanent weekend residence. They would leave personal belongings in the dresser drawers, hang clothes in the closet, and even keep toiletries in the attached bathroom. Sophia would use my expensive skincare products and perfumes without asking, often finishing entire bottles of foundation and moisturizer that cost me $60 each to replace. Mason and Luke transformed my home office into their entertainment center every weekend. They would move my desk chair to reach high shelves, knock over my carefully organized file cabinets while playing hide and seek, and use my computer printer to make paper airplanes. One particularly devastating weekend, they spilled grape juice across my laptop keyboard while David was outside grilling and their parents were busy gossiping in the kitchen. My attempts to address these issues with David always ended the same way. He would give me that patient smile that made me feel like I was being unreasonable and say things like, "They're just being family Chris," or "It's only temporary while they figure things out," or "They don't mean any harm, they just feel comfortable here." But comfortable was exactly the problem. They felt so comfortable that my own friends stopped visiting. My college roommate Sarah tried to stop by one Friday evening and found herself in the middle of a chaotic family dinner she wasn't invited to join. My work colleagues from the marketing firm where I managed social media accounts would decline my invitations to weekend gatherings, knowing they would be overwhelmed by David's boisterous relatives. My work-from-home productivity plummeted due to constant interruptions. Conference calls became impossible with children screaming and Gloria's loud telephone conversations with her church friends. Important client presentations were delayed when family members would walk through my office during video meetings, treating my professional space like a hallway. The financial strain was becoming unbearable. Our grocery bills had tripled from $150 weekly to over $450. The utility costs skyrocketed as 7 additional people used hot water, electricity, and heating every single weekend. I started buying generic brands and skipping my own lunch to afford feeding David's family while they never offered a single dollar toward expenses. The stress manifested physically through insomnia and emotional eating. I would lie awake Sunday nights dreading the upcoming Friday invasion, my stomach churning with anxiety about what boundaries would be crossed next. I gained 23 pounds in 18 months, buying larger clothes while my confidence disappeared completely. But that Tuesday morning when I discovered Amanda doing laundry changed everything. I had taken a sick day from work due to a migraine, planning to rest in my quiet house. Instead, I found Amanda in my basement at 9:30 a.m., running 3 full loads of washing, including items that clearly didn't belong to anyone in our household. "Oh, Chris," she said cheerfully when she noticed me standing in the doorway. "I hope you don't mind, but Tyler's work shirts needed washing before his business trip, and our machine is acting up again." That was when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Hanging on my drying rack were tiny pink onesies and baby blankets that definitely didn't belong to Amanda's 7-year-old twins. "Amanda, whose baby clothes are these?" "Oh, those belong to my neighbor Jenny. She's having such a hard time with her newborn, so I offered to help with laundry. Your detergent works so much better than ours." I stood there speechless, realizing that not only was my sister-in-law using my home as her personal laundromat, but she was also running a neighborhood laundry service from my basement. The audacity was breathtaking, but what happened next completely shattered my remaining composure. As I walked back upstairs in shock, I noticed something glinting in the soil around my garden gnome near the front steps. Kneeling down to investigate, I discovered a spare key to my house hidden beneath the ceramic decoration. A key I had never given to anyone and certainly hadn't placed there myself. The realization hit me like a physical blow. David's family wasn't just visiting on weekends. They had been entering my home whenever they pleased, treating my private sanctuary like their personal vacation rental. The violation felt so complete and devastating that I had to sit down on my front porch steps to catch my breath. That moment, staring at the unauthorized key in my trembling hand while Amanda's washing machine churned in my basement, I made a decision that would change the course of my entire life. The next morning, I called in sick to work again and drove to the electronics store across town where nobody would recognize me. I purchased 4 wireless security cameras, a digital recording system, and enough memory cards to document whatever was happening in my house when David and I weren't home. Installing the cameras was easier than I expected. I positioned one in the living room behind a decorative vase, another in the kitchen above the refrigerator, a third in my home office disguised as a picture frame, and the 4th in the hallway where it could monitor bedroom access. The setup took me 6 hours, but I felt like a detective finally taking control of her own case. David worked second shift at the engineering firm downtown, leaving the house each morning at noon and returning around 11 p.m. This schedule had always bothered me because it left me alone during prime family invasion hours, but now I realized it was perfect for my investigation. The first day of recording yielded footage that made me question my own sanity. At 2:15 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon, Gloria and Amanda entered through my front door using the hidden spare key. They moved through my house with practiced efficiency like a cleaning crew familiar with their assigned territory. Gloria went straight to my kitchen and began preparing what appeared to be a complex casserole dish using ingredients from my pantry and spices from my rack. She worked for nearly 3 hours, periodically checking her phone and laughing at text messages. At one point, she opened my wine refrigerator and selected a bottle of Pinot Noir that David and I had been saving for our anniversary. Meanwhile, Amanda made herself comfortable in my living room, rearranging throw pillows and adjusting the temperature on my smart thermostat. She spent 45 minutes on my couch talking loudly on her phone about personal family drama, including details about her marriage problems that I had never heard before. The most shocking discovery was captured by the hallway camera. Around 4 p.m., Gloria walked into my master bedroom and lay down on my bed for what appeared to be a nap. She used my decorative pillows, pulled my grandmother's quilt over herself, and slept peacefully for 90 minutes in my most private space. Thursday's footage revealed even more disturbing patterns. This time, Gloria brought 3 women I had never seen before. They settled into my living room with coffee cups, pastries, and what appeared to be book club materials. For 2.5 hours, these strangers sat in my home discussing romance novels while eating snacks they had prepared in my kitchen. Amanda arrived separately around 3 p.m. with a large bag from the grocery store. She unpacked ingredients and began cooking dinner in my kitchen, while the book club continued in the living room. The coordination was too perfect to be coincidental. This was clearly an established routine that had been happening for months, possibly years. Friday morning brought the most devastating footage yet. Frank and Derek entered my house at 10 a.m. carrying toolboxes and what appeared to be repair supplies. They spent 4 hours in my basement working on plumbing and electrical issues I hadn't even known existed. Frank replaced my water heater filter with a generic brand, and Derek rewired my circuit breaker box without any professional certification. But the real shock came when I reviewed the timestamp from 2 weeks earlier. A well-dressed woman in a business suit had toured my house with Gloria and Frank for over an hour, taking photographs and measurements of every room. She carried a clipboard and tablet documenting details about my hardwood floors, updated kitchen appliances, and finished basement. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely operate the computer mouse as I zoomed in on the footage. The woman's business card was visible when she handed it to Gloria, and I could just make out the logo of Henderson Realty, the largest residential sales company in our county. That evening, when David returned from work, I confronted him with printouts of the most incriminating footage. His face went completely white as he stared at images of his mother napping in our bed and his father rewiring our electrical system. "David, your family has been in our house every single day this week. They brought strangers into our bedroom. Your mother hosted a book club in our living room without permission. What possible explanation could you have for this?" Instead of apologizing or expressing shock, David became defensive and accusatory. "Chris, this is exactly the kind of paranoid behavior that makes my family uncomfortable around you. Installing secret cameras to spy on my parents is completely unhinged." Unhinged. They're using our house like a community center. Your father is doing electrical work without permits, and your mother brought a real estate agent through our home. You're exaggerating everything and making my family sound like criminals. Maybe you should consider talking to someone about these trust issues you're developing. The argument escalated until David stormed out of the house, claiming he needed space to think. He didn't return that night or the next morning, and when I called his brother Derek, I was told David would be staying at their apartment until I got my mental health evaluated. The irony was devastating. My husband was treating me like I was losing my mind for discovering that his family had been systematically violating our home and privacy for months. He was more concerned about my reaction than their actions, more worried about protecting their feelings than addressing their behavior. But I wasn't alone in noticing the family's intrusive patterns. Mrs. Henderson, my 72-year-old neighbor, knocked on my door Saturday morning with a thick folder of handwritten notes and printed photographs. "Chris, dear, I've been documenting the unusual activity at your house for the past 8 months. I thought you knew about all the visitors, but yesterday when I saw you installing those security cameras, I realized you might be dealing with something more serious." Her documentation was meticulous and damning. She had recorded license plate numbers, arrival and departure times, and even photographed Frank removing items from my garbage cans on Tuesday mornings. She had pictures of Gloria and her book club friends, Amanda's laundry deliveries from neighbors, and Derek's girlfriend Sophia sunbathing in my backyard during weekday afternoons. "The noise complaints started in March," Mrs. Henderson explained. "Children playing in your yard at 10 a.m. on school days, power tools running in your basement during quiet hours, unfamiliar cars blocking my driveway access. I filed 6 formal complaints with the Homeowners Association thinking you were running some kind of business from your residence." Her most shocking revelation came when she showed me photographs from the previous Tuesday. This woman came with an official county assessor taking exterior measurements and documenting your property improvements. I assumed you were refinancing or selling, but when I asked your husband about it at the grocery store, he seemed genuinely surprised. I stared at the photographs of a county official measuring my driveway, documenting my new roof, and photographing my updated landscaping. The woman with him was definitely Gloria, pointing out features and providing what appeared to be detailed property information. That afternoon, I drove to Henderson Realty and requested information about any properties the Freeman family might be considering. The receptionist, a friendly woman named Janet, checked their computer system and confirmed my worst fears. "Yes, Mr. and Mrs. Frank Freeman have listed themselves as co-owners of the property at your address. They've been working with our agent Lisa Morrison for about 6 weeks, discussing market values and potential sale timelines. Would you like me to schedule a meeting with Lisa to discuss your listing preferences?" My knees went weak as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. David's parents weren't just violating my home, they were actively working to sell it without my knowledge or consent. They had somehow convinced a real estate company that they had legal ownership of my house and were moving forward with sale preparations. I drove home in a daze, my mind struggling to process the magnitude of what I had discovered. When I checked my bank account that evening, I found another devastating surprise. $3,700 had been withdrawn from our joint checking account in 4 separate transactions over the past 2 weeks. The memo lines read, "Family emergency" and "home improvements." But David and I hadn't discussed any family emergencies or home improvements. We certainly hadn't authorized nearly $4,000 in mysterious expenses during a month when we were already struggling to pay our increased utility bills. I called the bank immediately and requested detailed transaction records for the past 6 months. What I discovered made me physically ill. Our joint account had been accessed 17 times by someone other than David or me, with withdrawals totaling over $12,000. Someone had been systematically draining our savings using authorization I had never provided. That night alone in my violated house with my security cameras recording everything, I made a decision that would change my life forever. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I was going to fight back with every legal weapon available, and I was going to make sure David's family never had the opportunity to destroy another person's life the way they had tried to destroy mine. Monday morning, I scheduled an emergency appointment with Patricia Walsh, the criminal defense attorney whose billboard I had passed 1,000 times on my way to work. Her office was downtown, occupying the 15th floor of a glass building that made me feel small but determined as I rode the elevator up with my folder of evidence. Patricia was a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She listened to my story without interrupting, occasionally taking notes on a legal pad while I spread security camera printouts, bank statements, and Mrs. Henderson's documentation across her conference table. "Chris, what you're describing constitutes multiple serious crimes," she said after reviewing everything for nearly an hour. "Identity theft, fraud, trespassing, and potentially conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. Before we proceed, I need you to understand that pursuing this legally will likely end your marriage and could result in criminal charges against your husband. I think my marriage ended the moment David chose to protect his family's criminal behavior instead of my safety and well-being." "Fair enough. Let's start by contacting Henderson Realty and finding out exactly how your in-laws convinced them they had ownership rights to your property." The phone call to Lisa Morrison revealed details that made my stomach turn. Gloria and Frank had presented documentation claiming David had added them to the property deed 6 months ago through a joint ownership transfer. They provided bank statements showing they had contributed to mortgage payments and home improvements, along with signed affidavits from family members confirming their financial investment in the property. "Mrs. Freeman, your mother-in-law, was very thorough," Lisa explained. "She brought notarized documents showing power of attorney authorization from your husband, along with receipts for over $15,000 in home improvements they funded. Everything appeared completely legitimate." After hanging up, Patricia leaned back in her leather chair with a grim expression. "Chris, I'm going to ask you a difficult question, and I need you to think very carefully before answering. Did you sign any legal documents recently that David presented as routine paperwork, insurance updates, tax preparation materials, anything that might have contained power of attorney language?" My heart sank as I remembered the stack of papers David had brought home in February, claiming our accountant needed updated signatures for tax preparation. I had been rushing to get ready for work and signed everything without reading the fine print, trusting my husband completely. "Oh God, yes. Tax documents in February. He said they were standard forms for our joint return. We need to get copies of everything you signed immediately. If your signature was used to transfer property ownership without your knowledge, we're dealing with fraud and forgery on a massive scale." The next stop was our bank, where I requested a meeting with the manager and a complete audit of all account activity for the past year. What we discovered was a systematic pattern of financial abuse that had been happening under my nose for months. The mysterious withdrawals weren't random family emergencies. They were carefully planned transfers funding the home improvements Gloria had used to justify partial ownership of my house. David had used the power of attorney I unknowingly signed to authorize renovations I never approved, then used those same improvements as evidence that his parents deserved equity in our home. The basement electrical work Derek had performed wasn't amateur repair. It was professional renovation funded by our joint account and documented for insurance and property value purposes. The new water heater, updated circuit breakers, and plumbing improvements had cost $8,400, all withdrawn from our savings without my knowledge. But the most devastating discovery was yet to come. The bank manager, a sympathetic woman named Margaret Chen, pulled up records showing that David had attempted to refinance our mortgage 3 times in the past 4 months, listing his parents as co-borrowers and claiming they were contributing to monthly payments. The applications were denied because the original loan was in your name, only Mrs. Freeman. Your husband would need your signature to add additional borrowers or change the loan structure. Margaret, I never signed anything about refinancing or adding anyone to our mortgage. That's why the applications were flagged by our fraud prevention department. Someone has been attempting to modify your loan without proper authorization. Patricia took detailed notes, while Margaret printed copies of every declined refinancing application. The pattern was becoming clear. David's family had been systematically building a legal case for property ownership, while simultaneously attempting to gain financial control over our home. That evening, David finally returned to the house acting as if nothing unusual had happened. He kissed my cheek casually and suggested we plan a romantic weekend getaway to reconnect and work through our communication issues. We could drive up to that bed and breakfast in Vermont you've been wanting to visit. My family offered to house sit while we're gone, just to keep an eye on things. The audacity was breathtaking. While I was discovering the extent of their fraud, David was planning another opportunity for his family to access our home unsupervised. I decided to confront him with everything I had learned, hoping against hope that he would express shock and offer to help me pursue justice against his family. Instead, David's response revealed the true depth of his betrayal. Chris, you're completely overreacting to a situation you don't fully understand. Yes, my parents have been helping with house expenses and improvements. Yes, they've been spending more time here because they're going through some financial difficulties. But calling it fraud and talking about criminal charges is absolutely insane. David, they forged documents claiming ownership of our house. They emptied our bank account to fund renovations I never approved. They brought strangers into our bedroom and hosted events in our living room without permission. How is any of that acceptable? My family is going through a rough patch financially, and we have the space and resources to help them. I thought you would be supportive of me taking care of the people who raised me and loved me unconditionally. What about taking care of me, your wife? What about my feelings and my rights in my own home? Chris, honestly, sometimes I think you're just not cut out for the kind of close family relationships that have always been important to me. Maybe we need to seriously consider whether this marriage is working for either of us. The conversation continued for 3 hours with David, alternately gaslighting me about my perceptions, guilt-tripping me about not supporting his family, and threatening our marriage if I continued pursuing legal action. He never once acknowledged that his family had done anything wrong, never once apologized for the violations of my privacy and autonomy. The final revelation came the next morning when I discovered David's recording device hidden inside my jewelry box. It was a small digital recorder that had been documenting our private conversations for at least 2 weeks. When I confronted him with the device, David claimed he had been advised by a family therapist to record our arguments so we could review them together and improve our communication. But when I checked the device's memory, I found audio files that had been shared via email with Gloria, Frank, Amanda, and Derek. My most private thoughts about feeling violated and overwhelmed had been broadcast to the entire family, who were using my own words to build a case that I was mentally unstable and incapable of managing my own household. That afternoon, the entire Freeman family arrived for what they called a family intervention to discuss my unreasonable behavior and escalating mental health concerns. They gathered in my living room like a tribunal with prepared talking points about my need for professional help and their willingness to support David through this difficult time. Gloria spoke first, her voice dripping with false concern. "Chris, dear, we're all very worried about you. The security cameras, the accusations, the paranoid behavior toward people who only want to help you. David has shared some of your conversations with us, and we think you really need to talk to someone qualified to help you work through these trust issues." Frank nodded gravely. We've consulted with our family attorney, and he's prepared some paperwork that might help everyone move forward in a healthy way. Amanda pulled a manila folder from her purse and spread documents across my coffee table. Divorce papers with a property settlement that would give me $30,000 for my share of a house worth $250,000. A voluntary commitment form for mental health evaluation. A power of attorney document that would allow David to manage all financial decisions while I received treatment. "We're not trying to hurt you, Chris," Derek added with practiced sympathy. "We just want what's best for everyone, including you. David deserves to be in a marriage with someone who can support his family relationships, and you deserve to get the help you obviously need." They actually expected me to sign away my rights, my property, and my sanity based on their manufactured evidence of my mental instability. They had planned this intervention like a military operation, using my own recorded words against me and presenting David as the suffering husband of a disturbed wife. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated my intelligence, my strength, and my determination to protect myself. While they were busy executing their elaborate scheme, I had been building my own case with professional legal support and documented evidence of their crimes. I looked around the room at these people who had systematically violated every boundary I had ever tried to establish, who had stolen my money and forged documents to steal my home, who had recorded my private conversations and used them to justify their continued abuse. "You're absolutely right," I said calmly, standing up and walking to my front door. "Someone in this room definitely needs professional help. And someone in this room is definitely going to face serious legal consequences for their actions." I opened the door to reveal Patricia Walsh and 2 police officers standing on my front porch with warrants for their arrest. The 24 hours after David's family was arrested became the longest and most transformative period of my entire life. I locked myself in my bedroom with my phone turned off, alternating between crying, sleeping, and staring at the ceiling, while my mind processed the complete destruction of everything I had believed about my marriage and my life. Patricia had explained that criminal charges would take time to develop, but the evidence we had compiled was substantial enough to secure restraining orders and freeze the family's assets, while investigators reviewed the fraud documentation. David had been released on bail but was forbidden from returning to the house or contacting me directly. By Thursday morning, I was ready to begin rebuilding my life with the methodical precision of an architect designing a new foundation. My first call was to Jennifer Martinez, the family law specialist Patricia had recommended for divorce proceedings. Jennifer was younger than Patricia, but equally sharp, with an immediate understanding of how financial abuse and fraud intersected with domestic relations law. "Chris, your case is unusual because the fraud was committed by extended family members, but your husband's participation makes him equally culpable under conspiracy statutes. We can pursue full property protection, spousal support, and damages for emotional distress." My second call was to Robert Chen, the forensic accountant, who would help trace exactly how much money had been stolen and where it had been spent. Robert's preliminary review of our financial records revealed fraud totaling over $28,000, including the unauthorized home improvements, mysterious cash withdrawals, and credit card charges for expenses that had never benefited me. "Mrs. Freeman, your in-laws were quite sophisticated in their approach. They created a paper trail that would appear legitimate to casual review, but the timestamps and authorization documents reveal clear patterns of forgery and theft. While my legal team worked on building the criminal and civil cases, I focused on protecting myself from further violation. I changed all the locks on the house, installed a security system with professional monitoring, and opened new bank accounts at a different institution where David and his family couldn't access my funds. The most challenging part was dealing with my own emotional recovery while simultaneously managing the legal complexities. I reached out to Sarah, my college roommate, who had tried to visit during one of the family invasions. Sarah drove up from Cincinnati that weekend with wine takeout food and the kind of unconditional support I hadn't experienced in years. "Chris, I have to tell you something," Sarah said as we sat in my reclaimed living room Saturday evening. "When I met David's family that night, I immediately felt uncomfortable. They were so territorial about your house, so dismissive when you tried to participate in conversations. I wanted to say something, but I didn't want to interfere in your marriage." "I wish you had said something. I was so isolated I started thinking maybe I was the problem." "You were never the problem. You were being systematically manipulated by people who saw you as an obstacle to their plans rather than a person deserving respect." Sarah's validation helped me understand that my reactions to the family's behavior had been completely normal and justified. I hadn't been paranoid or unreasonable. I had been responding appropriately to genuine threats to my security and well-being. On Monday, I received news that changed everything. Patricia called with information that made my blood run cold, but also filled me with determination to see justice served completely. "Chris, we've discovered that your in-laws have been running similar schemes against other victims. The district attorney's office has connected your case to an ongoing investigation involving elderly financial abuse in your county. The investigation had started when Mr. Peterson, my 83-year-old neighbor 3 streets over, reported that his new friends had convinced him to add them to his bank accounts and property deed to help him manage his finances as he aged. Those friends were Gloria and Frank Freeman, who had been visiting Mr. Peterson daily for 8 months, gradually isolating him from his adult children and convincing him to sign over power of attorney rights. Mr. Peterson's daughter lives in Seattle and only visits twice a year. By the time she discovered what was happening, your in-laws had already transferred $45,000 from his savings to accounts they controlled. But Mr. Peterson wasn't their only victim. The investigation had uncovered 3 other elderly residents who had been targeted using identical methods, befriending lonely seniors, providing helpful services like grocery shopping and home maintenance, gradually convincing them to sign financial documents, then systematically draining their assets. The total amount stolen from all victims appears to be over $200,000. Your case was the breakthrough investigators needed because you documented everything and fought back immediately. This revelation transformed my understanding of what had happened to me. I hadn't been randomly selected for abuse by an opportunistic family. I had been specifically targeted as part of an organized criminal enterprise that specialized in financial fraud and elder abuse. Jennifer explained that my status as a crime victim would strengthen my divorce case significantly. David's participation in a criminal conspiracy against you constitutes grounds for fault-based divorce with enhanced property protection and spousal support. Robert's forensic accounting revealed the sophisticated nature of their operation. The family had created multiple shell corporations and business accounts to launder stolen money, then used those funds to purchase property vehicles and investments that would be difficult to trace. The home improvements to my house had been funded by money stolen from Mr. Peterson's retirement savings. But knowledge of their broader criminal activities also revealed their most devastating betrayal of all. Patricia showed me evidence that David's entire relationship with me had been calculated from the beginning. "Chris, we found correspondence between family members dating back 4 years before your marriage. They researched your inheritance from your grandmother, your job salary, and your property ownership before David ever asked you out on a date." The emails were brutal in their cold calculation. Gloria had written to Amanda about the marketing girl who inherited that nice house on Maple Street and makes good money, and how David should definitely pursue her since she's single and doesn't have family around to interfere. David had responded to family discussions about my financial value with detailed information about my assets, my work schedule, and my personality traits that would make me easy to manipulate. He had reported on my desire for close family relationships, my tendency to avoid conflict, and my insecurity about not having living parents or siblings to provide support. "She's perfect for what we need," David had written in one particularly devastating email. "She's financially stable, emotionally vulnerable, and isolated enough that she won't have outside interference when we start the integration process." Reading those words felt like being punched in the stomach by someone I had loved completely and trusted with my entire future. My marriage had never been real. David had never loved me. I had been selected as a target and groomed as a victim from our very first conversation. But understanding the scope of their criminal enterprise also revealed something important about my own strength. I was the only victim who had discovered their scheme early enough to stop it. I was the only target who had fought back with sufficient force to expose their entire operation. I was the person who would help law enforcement protect other potential victims from experiencing what I had endured. That realization gave me something I hadn't felt in years: pride in my own intelligence, intuition, and courage. I hadn't been paranoid or unreasonable. I had been smart enough to recognize danger and strong enough to defend myself against people who had spent years perfecting their ability to manipulate and control others. Friday afternoon, I received a call that felt like the universe finally providing some justice. The district attorney's office had arrested 3 additional Freeman family members, including Tyler and Sophia, for their roles in money laundering and conspiracy. The scope of the investigation had expanded to include federal charges for wire fraud and racketeering. "Mrs. Freeman, your evidence and testimony have been crucial to building cases that will protect dozens of other potential victims," the prosecutor explained. "We're recommending significant prison sentences for all involved parties." That weekend, sitting in my peaceful house with new locks and a security system, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years: complete safety and autonomy in my own home. No one would enter without permission. No one would use my belongings without asking. No one would violate my boundaries or dismiss my feelings. I was finally free to begin healing and rebuilding a life based on respect, honesty, and genuine relationships. And I was determined to use my experience to help other people recognize and escape similar situations before they lost years of their lives to people who saw them as opportunities rather than human beings. Monday morning marked the beginning of my transformation from victim to advocate. Patricia had prepared civil lawsuits against each family member, individually seeking damages for fraud, emotional distress, property violation, and conspiracy. The lawsuits would run parallel to the criminal cases, ensuring that even if any criminal charges were reduced through plea bargaining, I would still receive financial compensation for everything they had stolen and destroyed. The first phase of my counterattack was served simultaneously to all defendants. At exactly 9 a.m., sheriff deputies arrived at David's temporary apartment, Gloria and Frank's house, Amanda and Tyler's residence, and Derek's workplace to deliver legal papers that would freeze their assets and require them to appear in court within 30 days. I wasn't present for the service of papers, but Patricia's investigator provided detailed reports about each family member's reaction. David apparently became hysterical when he realized the magnitude of legal trouble he was facing, calling his parents repeatedly while the deputy waited. Gloria fainted when she saw the criminal charges listed in the civil complaint, requiring paramedics to check her blood pressure. Frank became belligerent and threatened the deputy, earning himself an additional charge for obstruction of justice. But the most satisfying reaction came from Amanda, who was served while dropping her twins off at elementary school. According to witnesses, she began screaming about how I was destroying an innocent family and using the legal system for revenge. Her public breakdown in the school parking lot was recorded by multiple parents and later played on the local evening news. The media attention was unexpected, but ultimately beneficial to my case. Channel 7 News picked up the story as part of their ongoing series about financial crimes targeting vulnerable residents. The reporter, a competent woman named Lisa Rodriguez, interviewed me for a segment that aired Wednesday evening during prime viewing hours. Mrs. Freeman's case represents a sophisticated form of domestic abuse that law enforcement officials say is becoming increasingly common, Lisa reported while showing footage of my house and courthouse steps. Financial fraud committed by family members is often difficult to detect and prosecute because victims are reluctant to report people they love and trust. The news coverage brought forward 2 additional victims who had been targeted by similar schemes in neighboring counties. Margaret Walsh, a 70-year-old widow, contacted Patricia's office after seeing the story. Margaret had befriended a couple at her church who gradually convinced her to let them help manage her finances after her husband's death. Over 18 months, they had stolen $63,000 from her retirement accounts using power of attorney documents she thought were temporary emergency authorizations. I thought they were angels sent to help me during my darkest time, Margaret explained during her interview with investigators. They seemed so caring, so concerned about my well-being. I never imagined they were calculating exactly how much they could steal without triggering automatic fraud alerts from my bank. The second victim was James Morrison, a disabled veteran who had been targeted by a different family using identical methods. The criminals had befriended James at his rehabilitation center, offered to help him navigate benefit applications and home modifications, then systematically drained his disability payments and veterans' benefits over 2 years. These cases show a clear pattern of predatory behavior targeting people who are isolated, vulnerable, or going through major life transitions, Patricia explained to the media. The Freeman family appears to have been operating a criminal enterprise specifically designed to identify and exploit victims who were unlikely to fight back effectively. The expanding investigation attracted attention from the State Attorney General's office and the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. My case had uncovered what law enforcement officials described as a regional network of family-based fraud rings that had been operating for nearly a decade. But the legal victories came with personal costs that I hadn't anticipated. David began a campaign of harassment designed to pressure me into dropping the charges and reconciling our marriage. He sent flowers to my workplace with notes about working through our problems together. He contacted my colleagues on social media, claiming I was having a mental health crisis and asking them to encourage me to seek counseling. Most disturbingly, he began showing up at places where he knew I would be: my grocery store, my gym, the coffee shop where I met friends. He never approached me directly, which would have violated the restraining order, but his presence was clearly intended to intimidate me and demonstrate that he could access my daily life whenever he chose. The psychological pressure was intense, but it also strengthened my resolve to pursue justice completely. Patricia filed additional charges for stalking and intimidation, which resulted in David's arrest and a more restrictive protective order that banned him from coming within 500 feet of me or my workplace. Meanwhile, the civil asset forfeiture process was recovering significant amounts of stolen money and property. Robert Chen's forensic accounting had traced the family's fraud proceeds through multiple accounts and investments, leading to the seizure of 2 vehicles, a vacation rental property, and over $40,000 in cash and jewelry. Mrs. Freeman, we've identified assets that should cover full restitution for your financial losses, plus punitive damages for emotional distress and property violation, Robert reported during our Thursday meeting. The family's attempts to hide their fraud proceeds were sophisticated but ultimately unsuccessful. The most satisfying development came Friday afternoon when I received a call from Channel 7 News. Lisa Rodriguez wanted to update her previous story with information about the broader investigation and its impact on community safety. Mrs. Freeman, your willingness to fight back has protected dozens of other potential victims from experiencing what you went through. The FBI estimates that the criminal network your case exposed has been prevented from stealing over $500,000 from elderly and vulnerable residents. That evening, I watched the updated news segment while sitting in my perfectly organized living room, drinking tea from my grandmother's china and wearing pajamas that no uninvited family members would ever see. The story showed footage of various family members being led away in handcuffs, interviews with other victims who were now receiving restitution, and comments from law enforcement officials praising the investigation's success. But the most meaningful part of the broadcast was Lisa Rodriguez's closing commentary. Mrs. Freeman's case demonstrates that financial abuse thrives in silence and secrecy. When victims find the courage to speak up and fight back, they not only protect themselves, but also prevent countless other people from suffering similar violations. I realized that my transformation from victim to survivor had become something even more important, my evolution into an advocate who could help others recognize and escape similar situations. My experience, as painful as it had been, was now serving a purpose beyond my own healing. The legal battles would continue for several more months, but I already knew the most important outcome. I had reclaimed my power, my home, and my future from people who had tried to steal everything that mattered to me. I had proven that fighting back was not only possible, but necessary to prevent other innocent people from being targeted and destroyed. Most importantly, I had learned that my own strength and intelligence were far greater than I had ever realized. I was not a victim anymore. I was a survivor who would never again allow anyone to violate my boundaries, steal my resources, or dismiss my worth. The criminal trial began on a cold Tuesday morning in November, exactly 8 months after I had first discovered Amanda doing laundry in my basement. The courthouse was an imposing brick building downtown, and as I walked up the steps with Patricia beside me, I felt a sense of completion that had been building for months. David's family had been charged under the state's organized crime statutes, which carried significantly harsher penalties than individual fraud charges. The prosecution had spent months building a comprehensive case that detailed not only the crimes against me, but also the broader pattern of elder abuse and financial exploitation that had affected 7 confirmed victims. The courtroom was packed with family members of other victims, local news reporters, and law enforcement officials who had worked on the investigation. I was scheduled to testify on the second day, and I had spent weeks preparing with the prosecution team to ensure my testimony would be clear, detailed, and emotionally compelling. Judge Patricia Williams was a stern woman in her 60s who had a reputation for taking financial crimes seriously, particularly those targeting vulnerable populations. During her opening remarks, she made it clear that she viewed the Freeman family's activities as particularly heinous due to their systematic nature and calculated targeting of isolated victims. The prosecution's case unfolded over 4 days with testimony from banking officials, real estate agents, forensic accountants, and multiple victims. Each witness added another layer to the picture of a criminal enterprise that had been operating with sophisticated planning and ruthless execution. Mr. Peterson's testimony was particularly devastating. The 83-year-old veteran spoke in a clear, dignified voice about how Gloria and Frank had befriended him after his wife's funeral, gradually convincing him that his adult children didn't care about his well-being and that he needed their help to manage his finances safely. "They made me feel like family," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "They brought me meals, helped with yard work, listened to my stories about the war. I trusted them completely because they seemed to genuinely care about me. I never imagined they were calculating how much money they could steal without triggering bank fraud alerts." Margaret Walsh testified about how the same family had targeted her through her church, using her grief over her husband's death to manipulate her into signing financial documents she didn't understand. "They preyed on my loneliness and confusion during the worst time of my life," she said. "They turned my faith community into a hunting ground for their criminal activities." When my turn came to testify, I walked to the witness stand with complete confidence in my own truth and the evidence I had compiled. The prosecutor, an experienced attorney named Michael Torres, guided me through the chronology of violations, financial theft, and psychological manipulation I had endured. "Mrs. Freeman, can you describe for the jury how it felt to discover that your own husband had been recording your private conversations and sharing them with his family?" "It felt like the complete destruction of every foundation I had built my life on. Marriage is supposed to be a sanctuary where you can be vulnerable and honest with your partner. Learning that David had weaponized my most private thoughts and feelings against me was more devastating than the financial crimes. The defense attorneys attempted to portray me as a vindictive wife seeking revenge against in-laws who were simply trying to help with family financial problems. But Patricia had prepared me for these tactics, and I responded to each attack with calm, factual descriptions of documented criminal behavior. The defense has suggested that you overreacted to normal family dynamics. How do you respond to that characterization? Normal family dynamics don't involve forging legal documents to steal someone's house. Normal family dynamics don't involve draining bank accounts without authorization. Normal family dynamics don't involve recording someone's private conversations to build a false case for mental instability. These were criminal acts, not family disagreements. The most dramatic moment came when David took the stand in his own defense. His attorney had advised him to express remorse and claim he had been manipulated by his family into participating in their schemes. But David's testimony revealed the calculated nature of his deception more clearly than any prosecution evidence could have achieved. Under cross-examination, David admitted that he had researched my financial assets before our first date, that he had deliberately isolated me from friends and support systems, and that he had participated in planning the fraud from the beginning. His attempts to justify these actions as protecting family backfired spectacularly when he couldn't explain why protecting his family required destroying my life. "Mr. Freeman, you testified that you loved your wife and only wanted what was best for your family. Can you explain how recording her private conversations and sharing them with people who were stealing from her demonstrated love?" David's answer was rambling and defensive, revealing his complete lack of genuine remorse or understanding of the harm he had caused. Chris was becoming paranoid and unreasonable about my family's presence in our house. I thought documenting her behavior would help us get counseling and work through our problems together. "Mr. Freeman, your family was committing felony fraud against your wife. Her behavior wasn't paranoid. It was an appropriate response to criminal victimization. Isn't that correct?" "I never intended for anyone to get hurt. I just wanted my family to have financial security." "At the expense of your wife's financial security, correct?" "It wasn't supposed to happen that way." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts for all defendants. The speed of their decision suggested that the evidence had been overwhelming and the family's defense strategies had been ineffective. Judge Williams scheduled sentencing for 3 weeks later, but she made preliminary comments that indicated significant prison time for all family members. The systematic nature of these crimes, the calculated targeting of vulnerable victims, and the complete lack of remorse displayed by the defendants warrant substantial penalties to protect the community from further victimization. During the 3-week waiting period, I focused on the civil lawsuit resolution and my own emotional healing. Robert Chen's final accounting showed that I would receive full restitution for my financial losses, plus additional damages totaling over $80,000. The family's seized assets would be liquidated to pay all victims, with any remaining funds going to a community fund for financial crime victim services. Jennifer Martinez had finalized my divorce proceedings, granting me full ownership of the house's significant spousal support and a restraining order that would remain in effect permanently. David would receive nothing from our marriage except the legal bills and criminal record that would follow him for the rest of his life. But the most meaningful development came when I received a call from the state attorney general's office. They wanted to hire me as a consultant for their elder abuse prevention program, using my experience and evidence-gathering skills to help other victims document and prosecute similar crimes. Mrs. Freeman, your case has become a model for how financial abuse victims can protect themselves and fight back effectively, the Attorney General's representative explained. We'd like you to help train law enforcement officers, social workers, and community advocates to recognize and respond to family-based fraud schemes. The sentencing hearing was everything I had hoped for. Judge Williams sentenced Gloria and Frank to 12 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole before serving 8 years. Amanda and Tyler received 8-year sentences, while Derek and Sophia were sentenced to 6 years each. David received 10 years due to his leadership role in targeting and manipulating me specifically. These defendants systematically exploited trust-family relationships and community connections to commit crimes that devastated their victims financially and emotionally, Judge Williams stated. The sentences I'm imposing today reflect the serious nature of these offenses and the need to deter others who might consider similar criminal activities. As I walked out of the courthouse that afternoon, I felt a sense of justice and closure that I had never expected to experience. The legal system had worked exactly as it was supposed to, protecting victims and holding criminals accountable for their actions. But more importantly, I had discovered my own strength and resilience in ways I never could have imagined. I had transformed myself from a victim into a survivor, and now into an advocate who could help others navigate similar challenges with the benefit of my experience and hard-won wisdom. That evening, I celebrated with Sarah and my new legal team at a restaurant where I had never worried about uninvited family members interrupting our conversation. For the first time in years, I felt completely free to enjoy my own life without fear, anxiety, or the need to protect myself from people who were supposed to love and support me. 6 months after the sentencing, I was sitting in my beautifully renovated home office, working on my 3rd case as a financial crimes consultant for the Attorney General's office. The room that had once been invaded by David's nephews was now a professional sanctuary where I helped other victims document evidence and navigate the legal system with confidence and determination. My house had been completely transformed into a reflection of my authentic self, rather than a compromise designed to accommodate people who didn't respect my boundaries. I had repainted every room in colors that brought me joy, replaced furniture that held traumatic memories, and created spaces dedicated to healing and personal growth. The guest bedroom that Derek and Sophia had occupied without permission was now my art studio where I painted landscapes and abstracts that helped process my emotions and celebrate my recovery. The kitchen where Gloria had cooked meals without consent was now equipped with appliances I had chosen organized according to my preferences and used to prepare food that nourished my body and soul. My work with financial crime victims had become more fulfilling than any career I had previously imagined. In the past 6 months, I had helped 12 families document and prosecute fraud cases, recover stolen assets totaling over $300,000, and navigate the emotional trauma of betrayal by people they had trusted completely. Each case taught me something new about the psychology of financial predators and the resilience of their victims. I learned that family-based fraud was increasing rapidly as criminals discovered that relatives and close friends were less likely to report crimes or cooperate with prosecutions. I learned that isolation was the most powerful weapon predators used, systematically separating victims from support systems that might recognize and interrupt criminal behavior. But I also learned that recovery was not only possible, but could lead to a stronger, more authentic life than victims had experienced before their victimization. Every person I helped became living proof that fighting back was worthwhile and that justice was achievable with proper support and determination. My personal life had also transformed in ways I had never expected. Sarah and I had renewed our friendship with deeper trust and appreciation than we had shared in college. I had joined a support group for financial crime survivors that met monthly at the community center, providing both emotional healing and practical advice for others navigating similar challenges. Most surprisingly, I had begun dating James Mitchell, a widower who volunteered with the Victim Advocacy Program, where I now served on the board of directors. James was everything David had pretended to be, genuinely kind, respectful of boundaries, interested in my thoughts and feelings, and committed to building a relationship based on honesty and mutual support. Our relationship developed slowly and carefully, with complete transparency about our past experiences and current needs. James had lost his wife to cancer 3 years earlier and understood the importance of rebuilding trust gradually after experiencing profound betrayal or loss. Chris, you've shown me that it's possible to create a beautiful life, even after experiencing the worst kind of human behavior, he said one evening as we sat on my back deck, watching the sunset over the garden I had planted to replace the lawn David's family had damaged with their constant traffic. I've learned that protecting myself isn't selfish or paranoid. It's the foundation that makes genuine love and trust possible. The most meaningful validation of my journey came through a letter I received from an unexpected source. David had written to me from federal prison requesting permission to apologize and asking if I would consider visiting him to discuss his behavior and its impact on my life. Patricia advised against any contact with David, explaining that manipulation and emotional coercion often continued even after conviction and incarceration. But I decided to read his letter carefully, using it as a final opportunity to measure my own healing and closure. David's letter was filled with self-pity attempts to minimize his criminal behavior and subtle suggestions that I shared responsibility for our marriage's problems. He claimed to have found religion in prison and described his crimes as mistakes that he regretted but couldn't fully understand. Reading his manipulative words, I felt nothing but pity for someone who remained incapable of genuine accountability or empathy. The woman who had married David would have blamed herself for his continued suffering and considered visiting him to provide forgiveness he hadn't earned. But the woman I had become recognized his letter as evidence that he remained dangerous and unworthy of access to my emotional energy. I wrote a brief response that I shared with Patricia before mailing. David, I have no interest in rehashing the past or facilitating your emotional healing. You made calculated decisions to commit crimes against me and other innocent people. Those decisions have consequences that you must face without my participation. I wish you the personal growth necessary to avoid hurting others in the future. That letter represented my complete liberation from any remaining emotional connection to someone who had never deserved my love, trust, or concern. I was finally free to focus entirely on building a future based on authentic relationships and meaningful work. On a beautiful Saturday morning in May, exactly 18 months after discovering Amanda in my laundry room, I hosted a celebration party for the 12 families I had helped secure justice and recovery through my consulting work. My backyard was filled with laughter, conversation, and the joy of people who had reclaimed their lives from criminals who had underestimated their strength and resilience. Mrs. Henderson, my neighbor who had provided crucial documentation for my case, brought homemade cookies and stories about her new security system and neighborhood watch program. Margaret Walsh attended with her daughter, who had flown in from Seattle to join our celebration of survival and recovery. Mr. Peterson, now 84 and thriving under the care of a legitimate financial advisor, brought photographs of his new vegetable garden and updates about his renewed relationships with his adult children. "Chris," he said, "you saved my life by showing me that fighting back was possible. I thought I was too old and tired to protect myself, but you proved that it's never too late to stand up for what's right." As I looked around my yard at these remarkable people who had transformed themselves from victims into advocates, I realized that my painful experience had ultimately led to the most meaningful and fulfilling life I could have imagined. The woman who had been afraid to confront her husband about his family's boundary violations had become someone who helped others navigate the legal system with confidence and determination. The person who had isolated herself to avoid conflict had built a community of support, friendship, and shared purpose that enriched every aspect of my daily experience. I had learned that home should be a sanctuary where you feel completely safe and authentic, not a battlefield where you constantly defend your right to exist peacefully. I had learned that family means people who respect your boundaries and support your well-being, not people who demand access to your resources and dismiss your feelings. Most importantly, I had learned that protecting yourself is not selfish, paranoid, or unreasonable. It's the foundation that makes genuine love, trust, and community possible. When you establish clear boundaries and enforce them consistently, you create space for relationships based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. The life lesson that emerged from my experience was both simple and profound. Trust must be earned through consistent actions over time, not demanded through guilt manipulation or family obligations. People who truly love and respect you will demonstrate that love through behavior that honors your autonomy, supports your goals, and contributes to your happiness. I had spent 3 years trying to accommodate people who saw my kindness as weakness and my boundaries as obstacles to their criminal plans. I had nearly lost everything because I was afraid to trust my own perceptions and defend my own interests against people who claimed to care about me. But I had also discovered that fighting back was not only possible, but transformative. Standing up for myself had protected not only my own future, but also the futures of dozens of other potential victims who would never experience the violations I had endured. As the sun set over my celebration that evening, I felt profoundly grateful for the painful experience that had led to such meaningful growth and purpose. I wouldn't change anything about my journey, because it had taught me who I really was and what I was capable of achieving when I trusted my own strength and wisdom. To anyone watching this story who might be experiencing similar violations of trust and boundaries, I want you to know that you deserve relationships based on respect, honesty, and genuine care for your well-being. You deserve a home that feels like a sanctuary, financial security that can't be stolen by people who claim to love you, and the freedom to live authentically without fear of manipulation or abuse. Fighting back is scary, but staying silent is far more dangerous. Your instincts are probably correct, your feelings are valid, and your right to protect yourself is absolute. The people who truly love you will support your boundaries rather than demanding that you sacrifice your safety for their convenience. Have you ever experienced situations where family members or close friends violated your boundaries in ways that made you question your own perceptions? How did you handle conflicts between loyalty and self-protection? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you or might help someone else recognize similar warning signs, please consider liking this video and sharing it with others who might benefit from hearing about the importance of trusting your instincts and protecting your boundaries. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about overcoming challenges and finding strength you didn't know you possessed. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of a community that believes in supporting each other through difficult times and celebrating the resilience that helps us create better lives. I hope my experience encourages you to trust your own wisdom and never apologize for protecting what matters most to you. Remember, you are stronger than you realize, wiser than you believe, and worthy of relationships that honor your authentic self. Your boundaries aren't barriers to love. They're the foundation that makes genuine love possible.